Would you mind waiting outside, please?
I'd like to know what happened to my daughter.
Mr. Ritter, the doctor will be with you in just a moment. Would you mind stepping outside, please?
Carolyn, what are you doing here?
I was here when you came. Just didn't notice me.
What happened to Ellie?
I think I'd better let the doctor tell you.
Mr. Ritter?
Do you want to sit down, please?
No.
Well, sir, your daughter had an abortion. Your wife told us you didn't know she was pregnant. Apparently, she went to someone who did the operation illegally and didn't do a very good job of it. She had massive hemorrhaging, lost a lot of blood, went into severe shock.
Will she be all right?
Her condition is listed as serious.
I ask you a question.
Mr. Ritter, we don't know yet.
Do you know who did it?
We'll let the police find out. I'll file a report.
When?
As soon as I get a chance. The front office will notify the police as soon as the office opens in the morning.
Did you know about this? Did you look at her bag?
No. No, I didn't.
Maybe his name's in there.
She called me when the phone was downtown. She said she was sick. Dizzy. I got there at the same time you had.
740 Forest Avenue, apartment 1D, Dr. Mason.
John?
Hello. Sergeant who? Yeah? No, I don't know him, but if he wants a lawyer, put him on.
Walker, you finished yet? Let him take his call.
Hello, Mr. Judd.
No, Mr. Judd is out of town. This is his associate, Ben Caldwell. Can I help you?
Well, I hope so. My name is Ritter, and I have a daughter. She, I don't know, kids nowadays. She went to a man for an abortion.
What is your problem, Mr. Ritter?
My problem is, I just killed him.
Judd, for the defense. Judd for the Defense is brought to you by
Walker, show the counselor in. You know how they say old soldiers never die? I'll tell you what they do instead. They come down here and buy citrus groves. Start their own shooting wars.
I understand there's more millionaires per square foot in Houston than anywhere. Not that I'm one of them yet, but I've got 4 groves and a fleet of produce trucks, so don't worry whether I can pay your bill.
All right, Mr. Ritter, I won't. And don't you worry about your daughter.
Huh?
Yeah, I just phoned the hospital. They say that she's responding so well to the whole blood, they've taken her off the serious list.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now then, let's worry about you.
Well, look, that Mason, he couldn't have been a real doctor. Just some kind of worm. A fat worm feeding off women in trouble. And not even women. Ellen is 18 years old. Just plain good luck he didn't kill her.
And just plain bad luck that your shot didn't miss.
I'm sorry. I spent 20 years in the Army. 3 of them as a small arms instructor. I wasn't about to miss.
Mr. Ritter, I can understand how you felt, believe me. But there is no open season on abortionists.
You get 3 men with daughters of their own on my jury. I don't see them doing anything much to me.
Yeah, all right. Now, let's take a look at your case. Now, you were called to the hospital and upset by your daughter's condition, right?
I certainly was.
And did you make any attempt to notify the police?
Mr. Caldwell, a soldier gets around in his time. I know how some of those abortionists operate. Hit and run. No more than a few days in one place and then take off.
So you felt the police would move too slowly?
I was told the hospital wasn't even going to confirm anything to them till tomorrow morning.
And where'd you go to obtain the gun?
Nowhere. Had it right here. And the license for it here. Today was payday. I was in the groves with a lot of cash to pay all my workers.
So you were carrying the gun for a different reason? Good. All right. Now, you went from the hospital directly to the address you found in your daughter's handbag?
Knocked on the door. I said, Dr. Mason, I got some business for you.
He then admitted you into the apartment?
Yes. I looked around. I saw some surgical instruments, linens, towels, a couple of pans, so I knew I was in the right place.
Anyone else present?
No.
What kind of business did you say you had for him?
A girlfriend in trouble. And could he take care of her? He said $300. I said to him, you bloody butcher. Ellen Ritter is my daughter. On account of you, she's dying. Well, that's what I thought at the time. He looked at me with his mouth working like a fish. Well, I told him what was going to happen to him. Then he went for a surgical kit on the table and grabbed a knife out of it. The kind doctors use.
A scalpel?
You're right, a scalpel. And he came at me with it so fast, I just about had time to get the gun out of my pocket and snap off one round. So it hit right here.
What did you do then?
Opened the door. People were coming out in the hall. I asked one of them if I could use her phone. There was no phone in Mason's place. Poor woman, I guess she was afraid to refuse. But after she heard me call the police and tell them what had happened and why it happened, you know what that woman did? She made me sit down. She brought me a cup of coffee. She had me stay with her until they came.
Mr. Ritter, I want you to think this one over very carefully before you answer it. Now, what exactly did you say to Mason that caused him to go at you with a scalpel?
I told him what I was going to do to him.
Meaning that you were going to shoot him?
No, I wasn't going to shoot him.
Well, then what were you going to do?
I was going to hand him over to the police.
And that's all that you intended to do?
I only went there to collar him as God is my witness so he wouldn't get away.
Mr. Ritter, have you ever heard of citizen's arrest?
No. Why?
Because it would appear that that's precisely what you were doing. And if we can establish it, then I don't think you have to worry about the number of fathers on the jury. Because it's just possible your case may never come to trial.
Call came from Ritter at 10:15. Officers Davis and Jordan arrived on scene 10:25. Found one male Caucasian, apparently dead. Took suspect John Ritter into custody, confiscating 132 caliber revolver. That's it, Counselor.
Is there a detective's report yet?
Just a preliminary.
Premises rented as a furnished apartment on a weekly basis. Usual items of household equipment. Inventory follows. Sergeant, if there were any unusual items, would they be mentioned here?
Like what?
Like surgical instruments?
Yeah, they would be mentioned.
They aren't. Sergeant, if a scalpel shows up, would you please call me at this number?
Oh, come on now, Counselor. Don't bug me. You'll get it all from the DA at the arraignment tomorrow morning.
I suppose you're as much against public apathy as the next cop? I mean, a crime being committed, people standing around doing nothing about it?
Well, what's that got to do with it?
Should be willing to help me, Sergeant, because this is one private citizen who tried to help you.
Ellen, this is Mr. Caldwell. He's your father's lawyer. He wants to talk to you for just a minute. He's not going to upset you, all right?
Is it in the papers yet?
No, the papers aren't out.
Ellie Ritter had an abortion.
Ellen, stop that.
A lot of girls have them. I could name you a dozen of them. They have them, and then that's the end of it. Only a few people know about it. Oh, my father had to go and shoot the man. So now I'm going to be all over the front page.
Ellen, your father just didn't go and shoot the man. The man attacked him with a scalpel. Now, if the scalpel shows up, fine. If it doesn't, I've got to know whether some person removed it from the premises. Do you follow me? Now, do you know if anyone was with Mason when you were there?
He had a nurse.
Fine. Now, tell me anything you can about her.
She was a woman in a white uniform, that's all.
Was your appointment arranged through her?
No, it wasn't.
Who did arrange the appointment?
I did.
How?
It's easy. You ask around. Girls know these things. Somebody gives you a name and a number, and you call them on the phone.
It's a good thing I promised not to upset her. Otherwise, I'd have to point out there was no phone in that apartment.
Mr. Caldwell, what's the use of your being clever right now? If somebody helped Ellen, it's a friend she doesn't want to involve.
What friend? Your boyfriend?
Now listen, Mr. Caldwell.
I knew you'd get to that. Now you want all the details, don't you? Well, I'm not going to tell you who he is. Why should I?
Only if he can give us some important information.
He doesn't know anything about it.
What do you mean, he didn't go along with you?
No, he didn't.
Who did?
Nobody. I went alone.
You went alone for a thing like this?
A thing like what? It's not supposed to be anything more important than going to the dentist. I suppose if I'd done that, my father would have shot the dentist. Why did he just shoot me?
Mrs. Ritter, it is obvious that somebody went along with Ellen. Now, you're her mother. You must have some idea who it was.
I'm not her mother. Ellen's mother died when she was 10 years old.
I know, but you live under the same roof.
Not lately. I moved out of the house. Would you like those details, too?
Yes, if they have some bearing on my client's problem.
Well, they have, Mr. Caldwell. You see, the whole problem is that John retired too young. He was a 20-year man. Maybe he should have been a 30-year man. And by then he would have had enough of playing around with guns.
Mrs. Ritter, I don't seem to understand. A man gets into trouble because of his family, and his family doesn't seem to care whether he gets out of it.
I don't think that's very fair.
Ellen, can we establish this at least? You went to Mason for an illegal abortion. He performed it, and because of it, you nearly died.
Yes, we can establish that.
Fine. Can you give me a description of Mason?
I can't.
What do you mean you can't?
He was wearing a surgical mask.
She paid the rent a week week in advance, and nobody complained, so why should I come snooping around?
You fellows have had a long night. May I talk to the DA?
Assistant DA. Mr. Lincoln?
Okay, let him in. How are you, Ben?
Tired. Would you excuse us, please? Dave, I brought you something. Signed statement by the hospital. Ellen Ritter was subjected to an abortion. Obviously illegal, definitely mishandled, causing a massive hemorrhage.
Aren't you going at this a little hot and heavy? You could have waited and turned it up at the arraignment.
Dave, I'm pushing because I think when you understand the circumstances, you will join me in asking for a dismissal.
You're kidding. All I have to do is show a crime was committed.
Sure, a crime was committed, but by whom? The abortionist. My client just tried to hold him for the police.
With a bullet between the eyes.
Mason attacked him with a scalpel.
Which we haven't found. Look for yourself. You can see it isn't because we aren't trying.
Dave, can you establish that no other person was involved with an interest in removing incriminating evidence such as surgical instruments?
No. Score one for your side. The landlady says the apartment was rented by a woman who called herself Mrs. Mason.
His nurse.
We'll leave it to the jury to decide.
Dave, my client is a decent, respectable citizen who acted under terrible pressure. Now, why put him through the torment, not to mention the expense of a jury trial? Dave, can you guarantee that you wouldn't act in the same way if your daughter got into the same trouble?
Well, I guess I can talk it over with the chief.
I'd appreciate that, Dave.
Mr. Lincoln.
Oh. Identification Bureau. They say the dead man is one Stanley Devon, a salesman for the J. Major and Sons department store, a perfectly respectable salesman in their shoe department. Your trigger-happy client shot the wrong man.
Citizen's arrest. Highly original defense.
Meaning that you approve?
Meaning I'd never heard it used to justify homicide.
Okay, we'll make precedent. Any objection?
And what is our case in view of the fact that Ritter shot the wrong man?
Our case is that Ritter did not shoot the wrong man. Devon was Mason. The part-time salesman was a part-time abortionist.
And we can prove that?
Oh, not yet. But we expect to get Ellen Ritter to give us the person who arranged the abortion, who possibly can lead us to the nurse, and who, with a little luck, can be made to identify Devon as Mason, explaining the missing scalpel, surgical instruments, and so on.
Ben, isn't it just as possible that Ritter didn't take the time to look for surgical instruments, to question the man before he shot him? That he just stormed in there with a gun in his hand and blood in his eye and blazed away at the first thing that moved? Yes. For you.
Yes. Oh, hello, Mrs. Ritter. You what? Well, what did the doctor say? All right, look, you try and keep things calm. I'll be there in a few minutes. Mr. Ritter wants Ellen to leave the hospital and come home. Ellen wants to stay in the hospital. The question is, does father have legal rights over daughter? And I'll see you later.
Ben, will you think about something on the way over? If we do get Ritter off on this defense, what kind of precedent will we be setting? Will it be taken as a license for any private citizen to turn a gun on anyone he has a grudge against and call it citizen's arrest?
Will you do me a favor, Clint? Take over this case yourself. I mean it.
Why? You think I'd handle it any better than you?
No. No, I don't think that for a minute. But when you deal with a client, you give him every benefit of the doubt. When I deal with him, you don't believe a word he says.
I plead guilty. Throw myself on the mercy of the court.
No mercy. You, sir, are a hardened recidivist.
Three questions, Mr. Judd. Will you look over the Bannister contracts this afternoon?
Yeah?
Can you consult on an embezzlement case in St. Louis on Monday?
No, I'll be in Boston. What's the third question?
What does recidivist mean?
Get Monroe at the Pentagon. Tell him I want information on Master Sergeant John Ritter.
I won't get dressed.
You hear me, Ellie?
No, I don't hear you. Not a word. I was struck dead for my sin.
You want me to wrap you in a blanket and carry you down to the truck?
Give it another day. Let it go till tomorrow.
Why? The doctor says she can go home now. What's going to change by tomorrow?
Nothing. You're right. You're still going to ask me who the boy is. The minute you get me home, you want to know everything about him.
Now, you know I'm going to ask, and I know you're going to tell me.
John, what difference can it make who that boy was? How can he help Ellie now? Or you? Or anything that's happened? Look, John, when something hurts, it has to heal. And nothing heals when you keep tearing at it. John, why can't you leave people alone? Then Ellie would come home with you. And so would I.
Marilyn, don't do it for me.
Shh. You keep quiet.
You would come home?
Yes.
But would you still keep the door locked?
No. Not if I mean more to you than knowing who that boy is.
Look, I wanted Ellie to tell me because, well, she ought to. I'm her father.
John, it's a very difficult
But since you put it this way, I know who he is. Mark Thurman. So what's the use of trying to fool each other?
What's the use of torturing Ellie?
Look, I'm not trying to... I'll go pay the bill.
Mrs. Ritter?
Yes.
It seems that you and your husband were smoothing things over pretty well by yourself, so I didn't interfere.
Thank you.
Who's Mark Thurman?
He's a boy doing some graduate research and social work with some of John's farm labor.
You suppose that he arranged the abortion?
No, let him alone, Mr. Caldwell. He... Believe me, he didn't.
Mrs. Ritter, I'm sure that by the time the trial starts, you'll find out who did. I have a strong instinct about things like that. It's sort of the opposite of my instinct about women's handbags. Can't tell yours from Ellen's. I'll bet your husband's the same way.
Mr. Judd, my case is coming up next week, and I'm getting a little nervous. Are you going to handle the trial?
No, I'll be out of town at least part of the time. Mr. Caldwell will be handling your case.
I'm not complaining. I think Ben's a smart boy, but he's not you. That's what I'm nervous about. Can't we get a continuance till you're available?
Ben will handle your case better than I would.
Why?
You really want to know?
Yes.
Mr. Ritter, a lawyer is not a judge, but he should believe in his client. Ben believes in you. Whereas I would be up there trying to convince the jury that you intended only a citizen's arrest, and all the while, this is what I'd be thinking. One, why was your daughter afraid of you?
Well, she did what she knew she shouldn't have done. Is that my fault?
Two, why was her life in danger?
She went to a butcher.
You call him that. The fact is that abortions before the term of 3 months are relatively safe. After that time, it becomes a matter of life and death. Why did she wait so long? 3, why does your service record show a couple of courts-martial for brutality to the men under you?
I was acquitted.
But I would still be asking myself, is John Ritter a recidivist? Meaning a repeated offender. The offense being violence.
Look, I didn't want to shoot him. I wanted to hold him for the police.
4, why didn't you take a policeman along with you?
Did you ever have a fleet of trucks with a strike on and the goon squads moving in? You call the police, they come next Wednesday. You tell the police the grapefruit's being stolen off your trees, and they ask you, where's the evidence?
Which is what I'm asking you right now.
Judd, you don't believe me. How's a jury gonna believe me?
That's question number 5. Answer it yourself. Mr. Ritter, Ben buys your story, but as hard as I try, I can't. Not without hard evidence.
All right. I'll get the evidence. Mark? Oh, Mark! I'd see you for a minute, Mark.
All right.
I'm in a little trouble.
I know.
Of course you know. You're a college man. You can read a newspaper. The question is, do you know it's your fault?
Your trouble, Mr. Ritter, is not my fault. Ellie is something else again. If I'd known she was pregnant, I would have done something about it.
Like what?
I can't say. Nobody ever gave me the chance to work it out.
Well, I'll give you a chance right now. How'd you set up the abortion, Mark? What number did you call? Who'd you talk to?
I didn't have anything.
Was it Mason or
have anything?
What'd you see in that crummy apartment when you took Ellie there?
I have anything.
Mark, this is evidence for my defense. I've got a marriage.
I knew it. I knew it. I saw you drive past the house, and I knew what you were going to do.
I'm not bothering Ellie. I'm not bothering you.
Well, you're killing him.
Why won't he admit he took Ellie to that butcher?
Because he didn't take her.
I did. Now go ahead, John. Kill me.
Judd for the defense will continue following station identification.
First thing I did when Ellen told me about it was I went to my doctor and asked him if he could recommend some competent man. He said that 30 years ago, when some doctors had a hard time making a living, you could get a qualified man to do an illegal abortion. But not these days. He said there were other solutions. I said, with this girl's father, there were no other solutions.
They made up their minds without even trying me.
Ellen was scared to death of what you'd do if you found out, and so was I.
But you weren't scared to set it up behind my back.
Mr. Ritter, I think it would be better if you waited outside while we talk to your wife.
I'm sorry. I won't open my mouth.
I still think it would be better.
Mrs. Ritter, how did you finally reach Mason?
Well, I dropped a few hints at the beauty shop, and a week later, one of the operators gave me a number to call.
And whom did you reach?
A Mrs. Ferguson. She said she was Dr. Mason's nurse, and she made the appointment.
And do you still have that phone number?
No, I do remember the exchange. It was W.E., that's all.
Helen, check the nurse's registry for a Mrs. Ferguson under a W.E. exchange. Did you see a nurse at Mason's apartment that could have been Mrs. Ferguson?
Yes, I did.
Did you see Mason?
Yes, but Ellen was telling the truth. He was wearing a surgical mask.
All right, now we'll need as full a description as you can give us of the setup, the people, the surgical instruments, if you saw any.
I did.
All right, now, Mr. Judd has to leave for the airport. Why don't you and I adjourn to my office? It'll give him a chance to clear up what he has to do.
I can spare a minute. Mrs. Ritter, why didn't you tell the truth before?
Well, I didn't think John needed my help. He's gotten out of these scrapes by himself before.
What scrapes?
Well, he had some labor troubles, and he clubbed a couple of men. They tried to bring charges, but nothing happened to John. And he beat Mark Thurman once before.
Helen, would you come in a moment, please? Helen, would you take Mrs. Ritter to Mr. Caldwell's office, please? Thank you, Mrs. Ritter.
I'll be with you in a minute. You're going to be late getting into Boston.
I won't be back until the trial is underway. Ben, in the famous words of the fighting game, protect yourself at all times.
What do you want me to do? Drop the client?
I want you to be very practical about how you stick your neck out for this client. What kind of a man goes after justice for his daughter with a gun?
Did you say practical? Helen, is that Mrs. Ferguson on the nurse's registry? No? Well, chances are that she's not a registered nurse. Look under practical nurses.
Ben, you've got it pretty bad. Hope you didn't catch it from me.
Catch what?
The fever to win.
Yes?
Mrs. Ferguson?
What is it, please?
My name is Caldwell. I'd like to talk to you.
Oh, well, look, could you come back a little later? My husband and I are going out for a little while.
How long a while, Mrs. Ferguson? Long enough to get over the state line?
Tom! Tom!
The devil are you? Mrs. Ferguson, were you ever associated with a man named Mason? Also known as Devon?
You know, I don't know who you're looking for, but whoever it is, you've got the wrong party.
No, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I think these bags are being packed because you heard I was looking for you.
Listen, outside.
You hear me? I got a legal paper here for you.
You can take your legal paper.
Ritter's trial comes up on Monday. Now, I was hoping you'd be a cooperative.
Mister, you getting out of here?
Yeah, I would. But I think by the time I got back here with the police, you'd be gone, wouldn't you? You into custody on a charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution.
No, cop.
No, ma'am.
Well, then what do you think you're doing?
I think I'm making a citizen's arrest.
May it please the court. The prosecution calls Mrs. Geraldine Hull.
I don't know that.
Now, Mrs. Hull, please tell the court how the defendant came to be in your apartment.
Well, he asked to use somebody's telephone to call the police. I let him use mine.
And did you hear what he told the police over your phone?
He said he'd shot the man across the hall.
He shot the man. Did he say why?
Because the man had done an abortion on his daughter and she was dying.
Did he give any other reasons for shooting the man? For example, did he say he had done it in self-defense?
No, he didn't say that.
Or that he had been trying to hold the man for the police and was attacked with a scalpel or any other form of weapon?
No.
He simply said he shot the man because of an abortion.
Yes.
Defense may cross-examine.
Mrs. Hull, how long was John Ritter in your apartment before the police came? That time was the maid gone in.
I suppose anyone could have gone in.
And surgical instruments, a scalpel, or any form of weapon. Your Honor, this is highly speculative. Sustained. Mrs. Hall, just one more point. Isn't the fact that you gave Mr. Ritter a cup of coffee and sat with him until the police came?
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
Because, well, I know someone who had an abortion done by one of those butchers. She didn't die, but she was very sick. Afterwards, when she wanted to have a baby, she couldn't have one.
No further questions.
If Your Honor, please, a brief redirect. Mrs. Hull, this woman you spoke of, did she have any male relatives? A father, brother, husband?
Yes, all of those.
Were they upset or angry or whatever you liked over what that incompetent abortionist had done to her?
Yes, they were.
But did any of them go out and shoot the man?
Objection.
I will withdraw the question. If the court please, the prosecution rests.
How are we doing?
Would Your Honor grant me a brief recess for the purpose of consulting with my associate?
Court will be in recess for 15 minutes.
Excuse me. Oh, am I glad to see you. The DA's case is as thin as a needle, but twice as sharp.
What's ours?
We put Ritter on the stand and to tell why he shot Mason.
How do we prove that Mason was an abortionist?
Who got Ferguson?
I told you to protect yourself at all times.
Clint, why don't you think we can get Mrs. Ferguson to admit the truth?
Because this arrived at the office at the same time I did, and I accepted it as your attorney. Mrs. Ferguson is suing you for false arrest.
No, I never saw her before. Well, that is to the best of my recollection.
Is there any way we can improve your recollection?
Objection, Your Honor.
On what ground, Mr. Lincoln?
I think the court should be made aware that Mr. Caldwell, in his over-enthusiasm to defend his client, has placed himself in a serious personal predicament. He tested his own theory of citizen's arrest on Mrs. Ferguson, who promptly filed suit against him for a crippling sum of money.
Your Honor, this has no bearing on the case.
Naturally, he'll be helped in that other case if he can force some admission from her here. That is no excuse to badger the witness.
I will agree this has no bearing, but Mr. Caldwell, I will warn you about badgering.
Mrs. Ferguson, were you employed during the summer of 1964 as a nurse's aide at Memorial Plaza Hospital?
Yes, I was.
And wasn't one Stanley Devon employed there also as an attendant?
I have no idea.
Well, isn't this in fact where you first met Stanley Devon? Also known as Philip Mason?
No, I've never met him.
I will remind you that you are under oath, Mrs. Ferguson. Will Your Honor bear with me for one moment, please?
Mr. Caldwell, when will you be ready to proceed?
May it please the court. I'm ready now. Mrs. Ferguson, do you own a surgical kit?
The what?
Containing scissors, forceps, hemostats, scalpels.
I'm not a surgeon, Emily.
And yet the records of 2 surgical supply houses show that you purchased several such kits in the past few years, don't they? So that we can suppose that you lent or supplied other persons with these kits. Is that correct?
Well, that's not illegal, is it?
No. No, Mrs. Ferguson, not in and of itself. Is this one of your surgical kits?
Where did you get it?
Now, let's stay with the question, if you please. Is this kit yours?
Look, he barged into my hotel room and he beat up my husband, and then he broke into my car and he stole my property. I mean, he had it done. Can he get away with that?
If you wish to charge counsel with burglary, you will have first to identify the stolen article as yours.
All right, it is. The kit is mine. Now, what of it?
Now, was this kit and this particular scalpel ever in the apartment used by Stanley Devon, also known as Dr. Mason?
No!
No. You mean not to the best of your recollection?
Right.
Well, would a lab report showing his fingerprints on this scalpel help you to recall the truth?
I do remember now that I did work for Mason just one time. But I never expected him to do anything really illegal.
Oh, are abortions performed in furnished apartments generally legal?
Look, lots of times they just collect the money and then they go through some harmless motions and then they tell the girl that they can't help her. I didn't know that he was going to really do anything until he did it.
All right, Mrs. Ferguson, that story may or may not hold up when your trial comes. But not get away with perjury during the course of this case. Now, did you see John Ritter come to his apartment?
Yes. I was leaving and he pulled up in the truck. I smelled trouble, so I waited outside.
Did you hear the shot?
Yeah.
And what, if anything, did you do?
Well, I went into the building. I sort of mingled with the guy the whole.
Did you see John Ritter come?
Yes.
And go across neighbor's apartment?
Yes.
And did you go into Mason's apartment, move the surgical kit, other incriminating evidence?
And I take on property. Anything criminal?
Was a surgical?
On the table.
Was a skull in it?
No, the scalpel was on the floor.
On the floor? By the body? Possibly with the Mason's hand as a weapon when he was shot.
What did I?
No, Mrs. Ferguson. Whatever you say.
This was on the floor by the body.
Thank you much. Prosecution may cross-examine. Mrs. Ferguson, you testified when you saw Ritter approach the building, you smelled trouble. Did you mean by he looked as though he intended to attack Mason?
That's exactly what I meant.
Did you witness anything to indicate that Mason attacked Ritter?
No, I certainly did not.
That's all. You may step down. May I make an observation regarding the charge that my associate and I conspired in the theft of this... Mr. Caldwell. This kit was purchased within the hour from the Pyramid Medical Supplies Incorporated.
Ask for a recess.
No. Let's build up what you call a tempo.
Ben, we will never win this game that way. Ask for a recess.
Mrs. Ritter, you told Ben that your husband retired from the Army too young. What did you mean?
Well, it seemed to do something to him.
By something, should we understand that he seemed to turn brutal?
I didn't say that.
Both his courts-martial came in his last year of service when he was facing retirement. Isn't that true? And after that, what else put him down? In other words, is there some connection between his personal problems and the times he turned to violence, such as violence toward his Grove workers?
Well, I really can't answer that.
I think you can. You know what was going on at home.
Well, I don't seem to remember anything in particular.
You don't remember moving into a separate bedroom?
What kind of a question is that?
The kind you'll get from a district attorney.
You remember moving out of your husband's house, don't you, Mrs. Ritter?
Yes.
And when was that? At about the time Mr. Ritter took his feelings out on Mark Thurman?
John?
Or was that earlier? At about the time you locked your bedroom door?
John, what kind of a man are you to let him talk to me like that?
Oh, that's fine, Mrs. Ritter. Why don't you tell him if he had any manhood left, he'd break a chair over my head? All right, Mrs. Ritter. If I'm wrong, let Ben put you on the stand.
You better not.
Mr. Ritter, suppose I be district attorney for a few minutes. Go ahead. Now, Mr. Ritter, you will have testified under direct that you went to Mason intending only to make a citizen's arrest. Yes. Did you go calmly as a policeman would, with no hatred in your heart? I'm not going to deny it. You had feelings against the young man who was responsible for your daughter's course ID.
When was the first time you beat Mark? The time he needed 6 stitches. Do you remember? Back in June. And when was your daughter's 10th birthday? Yes, 3rd. Oh, when you found out about 3rd, she was under legal age, and you could have had the thing easily by having him arrested on statutory charges. I didn't want to do that. What do you want to do? I want to do what I did. You beat Mark Thurman because you wanted to beat him. Yes, and I suggest that you killed Mason because you wanted to kill him. Because your feelings of impotence had grown to a point where you wanted to kill somebody. And this was it. Okay, we can't win it that way.
Okay, in your opinion, how do we win it?
Maybe we don't.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, both sides having rested, it now becomes my duty to instruct you as to your verdict. There are 5 possible verdicts open to you. 1, if you believe the defendant went to the apartment of Mason with the willful and premeditated intention of killing him and did kill him, you must find John Ritter guilty of murder in the 1st degree. 2, if you believe Ritter went there without the premeditated intention of killing Mason, but while there willfully did kill him, you must find Ritter guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. 3, if you believe Ritter killed Mason in a sudden quarrel or the heat of passion, you must find him guilty of voluntary manslaughter. 4, if you believe Ritter killed Mason in the commission of a lawful act, such as a citizen's arrest, but without due caution and circumspection, you must find him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. 5, if you believe Ritter went to Mason to perform some lawful act, such as a citizen's arrest, but was forced to kill Mason for some reason or other, no fault of his own, then you must find John Ritter not guilty. The jury will now retire to consider its verdict. The court will be recessed until a verdict is reached.
What do you think the verdict will be, Mr. Judd?
Mr. Ritter, the thing that makes a crime is the intention in the mind of the accused. The jury doesn't know what was in your mind. They can only guess. No matter what I said before, I don't know either. The only one who really knows is you. So let me ask you, what do you think the verdict should be?
I don't know. I don't know.
Judd for the defense has been brought to you by